Sorry if you haven't seen me in a little bit. I've been getting this set up and stuff around me all set up so I can actually record videos with my face cam and have a nice little background. But right now we're going to talk about this week's spoilers for My Hero Academia chapter 386. So thanks to Rugusu, Dabi's pole dance, and Justice, and let's get right into the leaks. And just like Rugusu, I'm not going to be telling you guys the title of the chapter because apparently that only comes up on the final page, right? And it would be a bit of a spoiler, which is ironic since we are covering spoilers. So apparently the chapter begins with the police officer saying that several blocks have started moving again and that All for One has just passed through the city of Edo. Tsukauchi then asks if anyone can still fight, and another cop says that they've asked several cops for backup, but they're all busy. On the first page, we do see the big kind of like operations center where we see all the cops and all the different people who are helping out Tsukauchi, and they're all in front of various screens kind of surveying all the damage that there is, and we see the cops absolutely horrified at the state of affairs that the heroes are dealing with. That's when on the same first page of the chapter, another cop falls out of his chair and shouts the heat from Dabi's flames in Gunga. Tsukauchi tells him to explain and asks if Endeavor has been defeated. Pretty much like, why are you so concerned about the heat going on in Gunga? We're all nervous about what's happening with All for One. And this is where we get clued in on a very new and important piece of information. Apparently, the cop says that no, Endeavor hasn't yet been defeated, but the results of their analysis on everything going on with Dabi shows that Dabi is about to explode. The cop continues to say that since he got up to continue fighting after the end of the Shoto versus Dabi battle, Dabi's been concentrating the heat inside of his own body. Kind of like what Shoto did to activate the phosphor move. Like he pretty much sent his heat through his circulatory system to heat up the inside of his body to make his heat more effective. But since Dabi doesn't really have an eyesight of powers or anything to go by, this is kind of just like dangerous. The police officer then goes on to say that if Dabi continues like this, he'll only be able to last for about 10 more minutes. And then after that, all of his energy is going to be released and it's going to cause a massive explosion that's going to destroy everything within a 5-kilometer distance. Let me just type in kilometers to miles because most of my fandom is American and I'm sure they're not going to know what that is. So 5 kilometers is about 3.11 miles. So a 3-mile radius around Dabi is in danger if he doesn't stop fighting, right? And we actually see on page 2 kind of like the core in Dabi's chest that we originally saw glowing when he left the Todoroki battlefield and started using phosphor in the first place, and we see that it's kind of like spreading through his body and cracking, and it's more or less showing a visual of what it's going to look like as Dabi starts to explode. So that's just something that we have to worry about now, right? Like, okay, yeah, Dabi, we have another problem to deal with on our hands. Like, All for One isn't bad enough. Thanks, Dobster. Tsukauchi starts to absolutely freak out at this realization, right? That this 3-mile radius isn't safe because that's exactly where some of the UA shelter pods are right now that have been moving away from UA to get to safety. On the page, we see Tsukauchi really freaking out, right? And like, it looks like that feeling you get when like a sinking feeling hits you, right? That's exactly what it looks like Tsukauchi is going through. And Rugusu says Tsukauchi despairs and LaBravo warns him that some of the underground shelters are now close to Gunga. The civilians are in Dabi's blast radius. Then we see that the block where the Todoroki family's in keeps collapsing, and we actually see that on the third page, right? That areas of their bunker are collapsing all over them, so their only real option here is to use the emergency exit. This is when, not getting any sort of break, another cop goes, "We've got some trouble here," and we see Tsukauchi turn around like, what now? What could possibly be going wrong now? Tell me what else. And this is when one of the cops tells Tsukauchi that All for One is actually moving even faster now, probably because he was actually able to form the wings that he stole in the last chapter. We know that he had some sort of weird issue with rewind and the wings, and the official translation didn't really help all that much because Caleb and everyone, I mean, they just get a lot of things wrong with the actual translation for My Hero. So it kind of left us in this weird situation of not knowing what was going on with Hawks' quirk and All for One, but I hope that when this chapter is officially out, we'll get a little more like clarification on what exactly is happening with All for One and Hawks' quirk. On the page, we see All for One beaming towards Deku's location, and we see literally like sonic booms behind All for One, like those cloud or air rings that appear when anything is going like speed of sound, right? Like All for One is moving really fast here to try to get to Deku's location. And the bad news here from the police officer is that apparently All for One is now far enough, he's now within range to actually use his goo teleport quirk to get over to the area where Deku is. So now All for One, since he doesn't actually have to fly all the way there, actually has the potential to just show up on the battlefield and interrupt whatever is happening happening in the Deku versus Shigaraki battle. But something in this chapter is going to happen to keep him from doing that, and it's really, really hype because we actually called it on the channel. It's at this moment where Tsukauchi once again asks for reinforcements, but someone confirms that no heroes are going to arrive in time. And as all the police are despairing, wondering like, what are we about to do about this all-for-one situation, a voice comes over the communicator. But first, we cut away to the Ida and Todoroki section of the battlefield because we have to pick up on what's going on with those two. So according to Rukusu, cut to Kamino, and Ida asks Shoto how tired he is from using phosphor. But Shoto says apparently that he's fine, even though Shoto was completely gassed a little while ago. He says he can't stop here because there's still a chance that all-for-one may get to where Deku is, but Ida says that his mind is just kind of a mess right now because of the entire Dabi situation, like everything that they just went through in that fight against Dabi, with Dabi running away to the Gunga Mountain area. Shoto replies saying that he still has to fulfill his duty, realizing that, you know, just sort of beating Dabi in the fight but not actually putting him down is not enough to say that you did your job here. And Ida is absolutely devastated by the fact that someone as kind of his friend who guided him back from the right path has to deal with all of this stuff in his life, right? Like Ida's kind of just like feeling bad for Todoroki at this point, just thinking to himself that Shoto is such a good guy, right? Like it sucks that he has to deal with this, and I feel like we've all been there. We've all had that one friend who was really actually like a great person, but their life circumstances weren't the best, and you feel for them, right? You're like, man, I wish my friend didn't have to go through this. So that's when we see that Ida and Shoto are more or less crying on this battlefield as they walk and kind of lick their wounds, but that's when a voice of hope cuts through on the communicator, that same voice that earlier spoke to Tsukauchi. The voice says it finally connected over the communicator, and it's actually All Might's voice. So it's time to see exactly what has been going on with All Might in this section of the story, because we know there was a little bit of a mystery surrounding where All Might was after he left Tsukauchi's area with the briefcase. So let's see what All Might has been up to over the last couple chapters of the story. All Might says that he's happy to hear that Ida and Shoto are okay, and says that he doesn't have much time, so he's gonna have to be brief here. Both of them have to get to Gunga as quickly as possible. All Might shares the information that Dabi is going to explode soon, and while Endeavor is still fighting him, there's no one else that can really get there to save the evacuation blocks that have stopped moving in that area and keep them out of Dabi's blast radius. So All Might says that he's sure that Ida is going to be able to run there, and begins a short speech dedicated to Shoto. And the entire time that we're having this conversation between Shoto, All Might, and Ida, we see that All Might is like smiling, looking like really happy, really proud, smiling as the rain comes down on his face, giving this kind of like shonen hero speech for Todoroki. And it's just like the happiest that I've seen All Might look in a really, really long time. So that definitely stood out to me on the page that we see in the leaks. And we're gonna find out why exactly All Might is so resolved, or so like relaxed here, or at least maybe not happy, but definitely relaxed, like he's finally come to terms with something in a second. But All Might continues to talk to Shoto, saying that body and mind are two different things. And Shoto knows this better than anyone else because of all the things that he's gone through. Shoto tells All Might that he'd rather go help stop All-for-One, but All Might tells him, hey, don't worry about that. I got that. What you need to do is go stop Touya and reassure everyone, because you still don't really have a fix for that situation. And as the conversation between All Might and Shoto begins to reach its end, All Might says that the only quirks that can save Gunga are engine and half cold, half hot. Shoto isn't really sure if they could get there because he tells All Might that Ida's engines actually overheated during the battle, but Ida tells Shoto, hey, it's not a problem. This rain that's been going on for the last like 30 minutes or so has really cooled my engine down. So get ready because we're about to go. This is when we actually see Ida take his mask off and put it on Shoto, right? Giving Shoto that kind of like half face mask that Ida has that really reminds me of Deku's mask that he never wears. Ida says that his legs are for guiding lost children, and this is what he'll do with Shoto. And we actually get a full page spread of Shoto on Ida's back as Ida's engines just completely rev up, giving Nakamura a great reason to come back next season, because you can't miss this Ida cut, I bet. And as Ida poses up and starts using his quirk, looking as cool as he probably ever has in this series in the manga, he has Shoto on his back and tells him to hold on tight, as Stain watches and mutters to himself that they're giving their all for the sake of other people. Kind of like he's rejudging these two heroes who took him down initially, saying like, yeah, no matter what I said before, you guys are still fighting, you guys are still doing all this, you're clearly real heroes, right? Stain seems like he's going around different locations, judging whether people are actually behaving like heroes to live up to his standards. So while last week it seemed like Stain might actually get in their way or do something there, now it's not really clear like what Stain's purpose is, because if he doesn't grab onto Ida here in this instance, he's not going to make it over to the Gunga Mountain battlefield. So was Stain only here to like give a quick little moment of commentary about Ida and Shoto, or what was the purpose of having Stain here? I don't really understand. And as Stain is looking at Ida and Shoto, they kind of just disappear, right? Because Ida uses his quirk at full blast and actually pierces through several buildings as he launches himself, sending him and Shoto flying at full speed through the air. And we get a really awesome double page spread of this in the chapter. A narration then begins saying that Hawks' report said that young All For One is stronger and much more cruel. We then see Hawks holding Tokoyami on his battlefield, with Tsukauchi yelling "idiot" and All Might getting out of his car, saying that this has always been his battle as All For One gets closer. And the person that Tsukauchi is calling an idiot is actually All Might, because All Might is doing something really incredible in this chapter that I'm sure not a lot of people would have actually saw coming in the world of My Hero Academia, leading to a major sacrifice that we're actually about to see. All Might stands in the middle of the road, right next to his car, kind of in the middle of the city, in the path of where All For One is heading towards Deku, right? So he's kind of in between where Deku's area is and where All For One is, so he could kind of intercept All For One and get in between, trying to grab All For One's attention. And surely, you know, All Might is All Might. He's All For One's biggest enemy ever, so he knows that if he puts himself in All For One's way, then naturally All For One is gonna 100% take the bait, right? And even if he feels like he has no time to waste here, he's absolutely going to use some of his time to waste on trying to get rid of All Might. As All Might is kind of just standing there in the road, we see a little speck in the clouds start to get bigger and bigger as we see that All For One is actually in the skies in front of All Might. And All For One has like a face of like, wait a minute, that can't be who I think it is. And this is where All Might starts thinking back to all of their past fights, and he wonders if this new hatred from All For One is actually just Shigaraki's influence, right? Like, have you been around Shigaraki enough that this hatred started to build up in you two as well? Tsukauchi screams at All Might to get out of there, right? Like, All Might and Tsukauchi are actually really close friends, so Tsukauchi doesn't want to see what's about to happen to All Might here, and I don't think he's really like informed about what All Might has at the end of this chapter, but Tsukauchi is pretty much just like, hey, you need to go, All Might. Like, I don't know what you're planning on doing, but it's not gonna work the way that you think it is. Like, this is All For One we're talking about here, and he's literally undefeatable. All you could actually do is buy Deku time. Specifically though, he tells All Might that he should probably flee because he's quirkless, and that's when All Might in his head gets a vision of Deku, right? Like Deku in chapter 1 before he actually got his quirk, and we see Deku standing in front of a young All Might. It seems like it's All Might from UA before he got his quirk from Nana, standing in front of Deku, and on the bottom of the page we see All Might smiling with the numbers of the chapter 386 next to him, because we're about to get the title of the chapter. And the reason that All Might is smiling is specifically because he remembers when Deku asked him if you could be a hero even without a quirk. And it seems like this entire time, despite the fact that All Might's original answer was no, All Might has been pondering and wondering on that question to see if there is a way for that to be possible, especially after he himself lost his quirk. And it seems like All Might was able to find a very suitable answer. And this is where we get a final double page spread showing All For One smiling as he looks down and sees All Might and starts actually heading in his direction. And for All Might, we see something really interesting starting to happen, because All Might has been carrying around this briefcase ever since the Vigilante Deku arc, and in this chapter, as All For One spots All Might, we see the suitcase starting to transform and wrap around All Might's arm as the car behind him, All Might's Hercules vehicle, also starts to break apart and turn into some sort of weird like hyper mecha armor for All Might that I guess is going to be like a All For One buster sort of thing, like Iron Man from the Avengers, right, when he had to make the Hulk buster outfit. But All Might is joining the fight, and the chapter title is I Am Here, because All Might has officially rejoined the battle. So what do you guys think is going on? A lot of people actually did call this whole thing of All Might having a more or less an Iron Man suit to fight All For One with. A lot of us thought he was actually going to use it on himself to like fight against Shigaraki, and I personally speculated that it was like a fixed version of the helmet from the first movie that would have maybe allowed All Might to stay in his muscle form, though we have seen recently that All Might is capable of using his muscle form for not so extended periods of time, really just for a couple seconds or so. But we have no idea what this technology inside of the briefcase and inside of his car is actually like, when this got made for him, like when this whole situation got taken care of. But it seems like we are now about to get into All For One versus All Might Part 3. This is their third major fight that they've had, I believe. We know how the last two went with All Might technically winning both, but I think I honestly think that this whole situation with All Might and All For One likely fighting again is gonna be, no matter how good it is, because All Might is probably gonna get washed here, considering he's just trying to fight All For One with like technology, and I just can't really imagine that working. We're probably gonna see the original All For One versus All Might fight here, a flashback that we have not gotten over the course of the entire series that I thought maybe we would get if like All Might died and we could see it in the Vestige world or something. But here, since All For One and All Might are literally fighting again in the final arc of the series, I definitely think we are going to be cutting back to that original All Might versus All For One fight and seeing it in its full detail, kind of mixed in between everything going on in this current era fight. And just to confirm pretty much what we're all thinking, that this is an Iron Man suit of armor, Horikoshi's weekly author comment this week for this chapter is, "Hey man, I love the Mark V." And of course what he's referring to when he says that is the Mark V armor from Iron Man 2, which is the suit of armor that Tony Stark carries in the briefcase, and he goes like this, and it like spreads through his body and becomes the Iron Man suit, and he fights Whiplash with it, right? So it seems like, of course, Horikoshi is drawing some inspiration from that with this upcoming battle between All For One and All Might, and he is just completely embracing the reference here. But this is where I have sad news to give you, because sadly, My Hero Academia is on break next week. I'm sorry, we're all just gonna be here next week, sitting here without a chapter, without leaks or anything, wondering what exactly is going on, especially after that really massive cliffhanger with All Might apparently fighting All For One again. So I'm gonna do a proper video on this chapter probably tomorrow or the day after, talking about everything that I could find in the chapter that was interesting. But this has been the spoiler video for chapter 386, so thank you guys for joining me. It's Pineapple. Hope you're ready to see me more in this cool little setup. I've got some cool stuff here. This actually turns on. I forgot to turn it on. Look at that, and I just moved my whole shelf. And yeah, I love you guys. I'll see you later. Hope for more content soon, and peace.